Basic Brewing Radio is brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association, who invite you to celebrate Mead Month this August. For a limited time, the American Homebrewers Association is offering a free copy of Ken Schramm's book, The Complete Mead Maker, to joining and renewing members. Visit homebrewersassociation.org/mead for details. That's homebrewersassociation.org/mead. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, August 19th, 2021. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Adam Ross, head brewer at Twin Span Brewing in Bettendorf, Iowa, talks about the many forms of fruit available to us homebrewers and the pros and cons of using them in our brews. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows. If you go to basicbrewingshop.com, you can find our DVDs and our brewer's logbooks. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. And many thanks to everybody who is helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter, including early releases of our video episodes, recipes, and behind-the-scenes stuff. And every now and then you get a non-related bonus video. Like I've got a fun bonus video in the can for Patreon supporters this month. I shot a video about how to make chicken stock in an Instant Pot. Now, I know it's not beer or fermentation related, but if you like to brew, you probably like to cook, like me. So I hope it'll be useful to you. You can take some of those veggie scraps that you would have thrown into the compost or into the garbage. You should be using the compost. And some chicken leavings and stuff, and turn it into delicious chicken stock that, you can control the amount of sodium that you get in your diet better if you make your own stock for recipes and soups and stuff. Also, I have some fermented vegetable batches going on right now, and I'm documenting those for bonus videos, too. I've got some cherry tomatoes and habaneros from the garden that I'm fermenting in vacuum-sealed bags. And thanks to inspiration for that from Kim up at Creature Craft Soda in that interview that you heard a few weeks ago up in Joplin, Missouri. Susan and I tasted some of the fermented tomato stuff that Kim had there, and man, it was really good. I hope mine's going to be as good as that. I'm either going to make salsa or pasta sauce from that. As I've been threatening to do, I started a batch of hard seltzer using A46 Bartleby from our friends and sponsors at Imperial Organic Yeast, and I used the same recipe as my first batch of seltzer that I did a year ago. And if you remember, I had a little issue with the fermentation with that batch. But I used 4 pounds or 1.8 kilograms of dextrose in a 5-gallon batch, or 19 liters. This time I added the yeast energizer instead of just the plain, DAP yeast nutrient, and pitched the Bartleby at 98 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 C before setting it on the hot porch to ferment. And I saw activity start within just a few hours. So I thought everything was going to go a lot faster and better with this batch. The Bartleby is a Hornindal strain of Kveik, so it likes to work hot. Bartleby really worked well through my 7.9% New England IPA on the hot porch, and it produced a delicious beer in just a few days. Well, the seltzer was producing a lot of CO2 and airlock activity, and I swirled the fermenter, every few hours or so to degas, and a lot of gas came out, just like the first time I made seltzer. So on the third day, I took a gravity reading, and it was still really close to the starting point, same as last batch. Weird. So I added even more yeast nutrient and swirled it up, and now the Bartleby seems to be making some progress. It smells different. There's actual fermentation going on. So even with this amazing Hornindal strain from Imperial Organic Yeast, you apparently have to add way more nutrient to seltzer than you would normally expect, say, in a mead. to make sure that the yeast is happy, because there's just nothing for the yeast to eat, and just dextrose. A46 Bartleby is the summer seasonal from Imperial Organic Yeast, and I can attest it does produce delicious tropical fruit flavors when fermented at the top of its temperature range, at least with my Nipa, which sadly is just a fond memory now. Looking forward to the results of this hard seltzer. Ask your local homebrew store about A46 Bartleby from Imperial Organic Yeast, and check them out at imperialyeast.com. That's imperialyeast.com. Here's a programming note. I'm scheduled to interview Dr. Keith Villa for a second time on Monday on Brewing with Cannabis, which is also the title of his book that's now available from Brewers Publications. You can order that book or download it to your Kindle and such, like I did. It's really a good read. If you have questions for Keith, drop me a line before Monday at james@basicbrewing.com, and I'll try to get those in on that conversation. Okay, let's talk to Adam Ross of Twin Span Brewing about the many forms of fruit. Adam Ross, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Glad to be back, James.
I have you back. I've been having you back a lot, but you're fun to talk to, and you seem to know what you're talking about. So
yeah, do I get a special jacket or anything after so many times on the show?
You'll get a patch.
Okay, great.
I'll send you a sticker.
No,
I'll a frequent flyer card. I'll stamp your card.
Good. Good. Yeah, you asked me about this topic today, and yeah, I'm always happy to talk about beer. I actually just last night I was on another buddy of mine who has a podcast, and I was talking about beer. So that's what I like to do.
And so I looked at I said, well, I hadn't talked to Adam in a while. So I looked at your website up there at Twin Span Brewing. And I said, "Oh, you've got like some tasty fruit beers on tap." And we talked last time. We talked for your grab bag segment. We talked a little bit about fruit beers, but I've just got fruit on the brain, and it's because I've got this, fruit from Oregon, fruit puree. They sent me some stuff, and I've got 2 more cans that I got to figure out what to do with. So selfishly, part of it is being selfish and getting some ideas. But turns out you have kind of an extensive experience with fruit.
Yeah, I wasn't sure why you wanted to talk to me about fruit until I looked through my releases at Twin Span, and since we opened last May, so what is that, 15 months. And of the 66 beers I've released so far, 28 have had fruit, and there might have been more I think if you count pumpkin as fruit, which some people do.
It's a gourd.
That bumps it up. Yeah, and I actually have, I think, 3 in the works right now that have yet to be released, 2 or 3. So yeah, I might know a thing or two about fruit and beer.
So why should we care about fruit beers? I mean, fruit beers, sometimes they have the reputation of being, and I'm going to be completely sexist here, just because I'm saying what other people have said. Oh, those are girly beers. If you want to, if you have a fruited wheat beer, that's for the women that come in the bar. That's what people used to say in the olden days. But now we know we are woke nowadays, and we know that women have better palates than men probably, and like lots of all kinds of different beers. But why should we care about fruit beers? Why are fruit beers good?
Yeah, I mean, scientifically, women do have better palates. They have more taste buds than males. So yeah, they might know a thing or two what they're talking about. And yeah, like you mentioned, it does seem 10, 15 years ago in particular, fruit beer kind of had a bad rap, and it kind of clashed with that homebrewer bro culture of like you said, that's a girl's drink. But fortunately, people are coming around to treating it as another tool in the toolbox for flavor, realizing that I think most of us out there enjoy at least one fruit flavor, and we all enjoy beer, so why not combine the two? And from a industry trend sales perspective, fruit beers are on the rise for sure. I think it was the Brewers Association. They do every year a look back at the previous year in terms of trends, and then guesses for the coming year. And one of the guesses this year was that fruited Berliner Weisses were going to be big.
Hmm.
And absolutely, I've had a fruited Berliner Weiss on in some form or function for the better part of the year, and it is almost always our best seller.
Hmm.
People love fruit. They love what fruit can add to a beer. So and as most of us like to experiment with different ingredients and flavors, why not? Fruit opens up a whole new spectrum of flavor.
And you don't have to dump, the whole fruit stand into your beer. You can have some common sense about it and have a fruit and beer combination, where it's complementary, and so you get new flavors and you get a combination of flavors where, it's not necessarily a dominant fruit flavor in the beer. So you can use some common sense and use some technique and some skill and to come up with something that's tasty and interesting.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't have to be. Another thing that I feel has changed was it used to be if someone wanted to brew a fruit beer, it would be like, I'm going to make a Hefeweizen with apricots. I'm going to make a stout with cherries. And anymore, there seems to be more of a cohesiveness where it doesn't have to be just a finished beer and then you add fruit to it. It's more of this is another flavor component, and we can go as subtle or as heavy as we want. And we go subtle enough, we might not even have to call out the fruit. It might just lean into the rest of the flavors there.
So when you're adding fruit, what are your options? I mean, rather than just like cutting up some fruit, well, one of the options is just cutting up some fruit and adding it into the beer, but what forms of fruit are there out there?
Yeah, I'll run through the forums and then we can dig into each of them a little bit, see what the pros and cons of each are. Um, and I'm going to go in order of least processed or most pure to most processed, and we can talk about why I'm listing them that way. But yeah, you have fresh whole fruit. Um, you can pick it off a tree, you can get it from the farmer's market, whatever. Then you have frozen whole fruit, and that is a different story there. Then there's puree. I not a lot of people will call this out as something separate, but I wanted to call it out. Syrup, a flavored syrup, or syrup, depending where you are in the country.
Thank you.
And then concentrate, extract, and I throw juice in there as well. That might fit somewhere around puree. And then there's these freeze-dried options, either whole freeze-dried or powdered, which I won't really talk about because full disclosure, I've never used them. I don't know anything about using freeze-dried.
So I've used fresh or whole. I've been playing a little bit with, or a lot actually, about an app to learn to reawaken my Spanish on my phone. So if my verbs sound weird, I'll just blame it on that, and not my low blood sugar or any of the things going on in my aging mind. But I've used fresh fruit, frozen fruit, puree, extract. I don't know that I've used a syrup. What do you characterize as a syrup? Is that like a sugar added kind of thing?
Yeah, so a lot of times a syrup can, and this is where I think it's worth calling out because it can trip you up if you're shopping for fruit options. A syrup can be just like simple syrup, sugar, water reduced to a certain viscosity, and then they add an extract flavoring to it, artificial flavoring. Or it can be a puree that's been thinned out and reduced down enough into a syrup level. And the good vendors out there, the good suppliers, will tell you which is which. But you can still be tripped up by it. I have personally with some of the experiments I've done at the brewery. Amaretti is good at calling it out, one of the suppliers. They're all over the place. they can have like a pomegranate syrup and a pomegranate um, puree, and they're totally different products. They taste completely different.
Hmm.
And they contribute different amounts of sugars on a beer. That's really important. That syrup is just pure fermentable sugar, and that puree is, any amount of acidity and sugar and water content and all those factors to it.
Yeah, the puree that I've used, the 2 cans of puree, I've used pineapple and then this dark red sweet cherry, they just taste like fresh fruit. There's a form factor which may or may not be positive, depending on your application. I've used the puree in the keg, and there's the first few pints that come out are gloppy, but once you get through that, it's okay. And Steve Wilkes was telling me about some a mead that he made recently with puree, and there was quite a bit of stuff in the bottom of the fermenter. So I guess if you're talking about pros and cons, that would be one set of cons that you have to look at is when you add fruit, if you're adding actual fruit or something that has pulp still, you're gonna have to deal with that one way or the other.
Yeah, so I of everything I listed other than freeze dried, I've used them all up at the brewery in this last year. So I have stories around each. But the pulpy puree thing, so I had one that I just thought I got a kick out of it. So I made this over 300 gallons of this peach pale ale, and because last year I had done a peach Kolsch and everyone loved it. And it was real whole peaches. I made the puree myself. I got them from Missouri, and just awesome. I didn't have as much time or ability and timing on the harvest, everything to do that this year. So I used puree, and I added it with this, like I said, peach pale ale. And again, with scheduling, I need to get better at it. That's one of the things I've been learning as a professional brewer versus home brewer. So I transferred over this beer into the bright tank. So the beer's done. It's finished fermenting. Um, what I should have done was add the puree there in the fermenter and let it kind of chill out and blend together, and then moved it to the bright tank. Uh, from a geometric perspective, fermenters usually have a cone on the bottom so that the beer can be transferred off the top of anything that drops out. So you don't, on the professional scale, you might not have as big a concern about using puree because unlike a keg, you're not going right to the bottom and pulling the liquid. But I added it to the bright because I'm like, as a home brewer, I did my Belgian red clone, I did other beers, and you just get a little bit of goop, and then it blends into the beer, and you push through it. Not so in these big bright tanks. So the first beers that pulled off that bright tank were like you needed to brush your teeth. They coated the glass. And I was stressing over it because I assured my business partners, I'm like, it's going to punch through. Don't worry about it. And we'll quietly release it. The people, we won't really promote it. The people who do order were like, hey, heads up, this is going to be really thick. It's going to be like a smoothie. And I thought no one would buy this. They'd just knock it down on review sites. Just what is this? They loved it. They absolutely loved this goopy, hard to clean glassware. I felt like I needed to floss afterwards. And it took like 2 weeks to push through all that in the bright tank. And then finally it gets to the point where this is what I had in mind. I wanted this, it didn't contribute too much to the body and it didn't muddy everything up. But people are like, yeah, I liked it better before.
Yeah, there's a consistency issue there that you can't maintain the consistency of the glop all the way through.
Yeah, I did. Just recently, I bought a pressurized hopback, and next time I do a heavily fruited pureed beer, I'm going to try to use that hopback to circulate the beer in the fermenter, and hopefully blend in that puree better than just letting it, because usually you add it when the beer is cold because you don't want to kick up fermentation again.
Mm-hmm.
And that puree then stays solid. It doesn't want to blend in because it just wants to sink to the bottom of the tank and just sit there. And so less of a concern at the homebrew scale, but we're talking hundreds or thousands of dollars of puree. You don't want to just let it sit at the bottom of the tank and not worry about it.
Right.
You want it in there.
So I guess that's what are the advantages of the puree? I mean, compare and contrast and show your work of some of the of some of these. Like,
Yeah.
why would you want to do, like chunk up? Why didn't you instead just want to chunk up those peaches and and throw them in, as opposed to making a puree? It seems like that maybe the peaches, you would maybe still get the flavor, maybe not as much, but it might gum up the works a little less. I don't know.
Yeah, so I can work through in that order of least processed to most processed. So the advantages to fresh would be, and when I say fresh, I don't mean, plucked well before it's ready. You want to use fruit that is ripe. Like when you're making banana bread, you don't use the bananas that are completely yellow. You want to use bananas that have some brown spots, that have gotten a little mushy, because that's when they're going to have the most flavor and the most sweetness and best contribution to a beer. So fresh, you're definitely going to get that most truest to form, truest to reality fruit expression. You can also do some fun stuff like, I pick this from my backyard, or this part of the country we live in is really well known for this type of fruit, so I'm going to make a beer with this fruit from a local grower. And as a home brewer, that's tons of fun. You can try all sorts of fruit that you might not be able to get in puree form. Those are the advantages there. Freshness, the best flavor, ability to call out local influence. But there's a lot of downsides to it. So fresh unprocessed fruit is going to have bacteria on it.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a finished beer, if you add it to a beer, it will kick up fermentation at some point. It might not be immediate, but it will change your beer in that format. And you don't want that, particularly when you make 500 gallons of a beer. If it doesn't move right away, you're gonna by the end of that, you're going to have, or if you're a home brewer and you don't go through your beers that quickly, that beer will be totally different at the end of the serving vessel, and maybe not for the better.
And I guess technically you could pasteurize that fruit, but then you might be damaging some of the freshness of the flavors.
Right, yeah, you would. You'd be processing it. So that would move it into kind of that frozen process category of using fruit. If you freeze the fruit or pasteurize it, you're going to have a more stable product in the end, but you're also going to not have quite as bright or as vibrant or as true to form flavor. So you will have knocked out the one big con of infecting your beer, but then you still have the cons of haze contribution. If there's pulp, if there's pectin in the fruit, it will affect mouthfeel and maybe not in the way you expect, especially if you're tossing in, chunks of fruit. And then the big one in particular for big con, in particular for pro brewing, is consistency. So different growers, different times a year, different years, the fruit is going to be different, and each individual fruit will be different. You just don't know how it's going to contribute to mouthfeel or acidity, or even just flavor, how it expresses. I personally would only recommend using whole fruit in conjunction with another fruit format, or if you're doing something like a sour or a wild ale, and then you just lean into that terroir and randomness you're going to get from that.
Even with frozen fruit, I did a kettle sour beer one time, a small batch, and split it up. and into one of the batches I put chunked frozen uh, peaches and mangoes. And
Mm.
after a week or two, I got a little bit of a pellicle on the top of it. So there was still something going on in there. It didn't hurt the beer, and I sent a picture to Mike Tonsmeyer to make sure I wasn't going to like poison myself or something. But is this right? Am I gonna should I throw this out? But so the beer turned out well, but still there's something going on in there somewhere.
Did he just tell you no, you're not going to die, or
Well, he said
try a little bit, wait a day,
he
try a little bit more?
he kind of he kind of hedged his bet. He probably looked at the photo, rolled his eyes, and then he texted me. He said, "Yeah, home fermentations are kind of funny sometimes," or something like. So he definitely didn't say, "Don't drink that."
Yeah, so there is a acidity level where you don't have to worry about dying from beer. I'm not going to claim to know what it is or say it to save myself being sued or
Yeah, good
being
point. Do your research. Don't do what
Do your
we say.
research.
Our friends and sponsors at High Gravity in Tulsa are going to be hosting the Tulsa Craft Beer Invitational on Saturday, September 11th. 30-plus Oklahoma breweries will be represented, around half the breweries in the state, and they're going to be serving special one-off beers, some brewed just for the event. It's going to be outside, and attendance is limited so you can feel safer in these COVID times. And while you're there, you can visit High Gravity, since you're going to be just there in their parking lot, and see the incredible inventory of home brewing and winemaking ingredients and equipment, including Warthog electric brewing gear. And you can order your Warthog gear on highdgravitybrew.com using the code EBC75BB, and you'll save $75 off your Warthog purchase. Then, maybe, if you plan it right, you can pick up your shiny new system there when you go to the Tulsa Craft Beer Invitational. Make sure and give Dave plenty of time to put it together. Maybe call him. Tell him you're coming. That's Saturday, September 11th, in the parking lot of High Gravity in Tulsa for the Tulsa Craft Beer Invitational. Check them all out at family-owned and operated highdgravitybrew.com. highdgravitybrew.com. But one of the positive things of purees is that they do, if you're canning something, canning the big C canning, not just but if you're preserving something in a commercial basis, you can pasteurize things at lower temperatures and not affect the flavor so much. So it's not just like you're boiling a bunch of fruit on your home stove or whatever. So that's one advantage of the canned stuff, is that the cans would blow up if they didn't. You know that there's nothing active in there, or else it wouldn't be stable.
Yeah, you're right. And you keep saying can from a larger scale, from commercial perspective. You usually get puree in pouches or bladders, like wine in a box.
Well, I'm using the verb to can, as in pressure cooking something to a certain temperature for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if these bladderized, pouchized purees, how they get treated, but if you go shopping around for them, they will call out if it's aseptic, and you want to look for aseptic because that is their guarantee of saying you're not going to get any microbes or any kind of infection off of using this. And I don't know if it's that same process of pressure cooking to make it aseptic. I'm sure there's some scientists or food scientists out there who's probably pretty clear cut, but yeah, you want to make sure you see aseptic puree, and you can get purees that aren't aseptic, and there's still a chance that the puree can introduce something you don't want introduced into the beer. So you had Oregon fruit purees on a while back. Yeah, they're all aseptic. There's like a supplier called Aseptic Fruit Supply or Fruit Puree. That's their company name. Yeah, they're every vendor's a little different, and they do process things a little bit differently. You should not treat puree as today I'm using strawberry puree from this supplier, and tomorrow I'm going to use it from this supplier, and it's going to be the same. They're going to be
Mm.
totally different.
Hmm.
But with that being said, I love puree. It's my favorite of the options here, because they're so explicit with it. So you don't want to just, if you're reading a recipe and someone says add um, 2 pounds of this puree or add a quart of this puree, uh, you're only getting half the story. You need to know um, the bricks, the sugar content, and any supplier worth their salt will have that listed somewhere
Hmm.
of the puree. And the higher the bricks, the more concentrated the fruit is going to be,
Hmm.
but also probably the more processed and therefore less true to form it's going to be.
Oh, interesting.
Um, but then the lower you have these issues, the lower bricks, you have these issues of it could potentially thin out your beer because there's a lot of water in there.
Good point.
And you could not get the mouthfeel effects that you want from, adding in a really thick, heavy puree. Um, and then I don't have any equation on how that changes your recipe, but Beersmith does. So if I am going to use a puree in at TwinSpan, I look up that information, the bricks and everything, and I plug it into the software. I add it as a new ingredient in the software, and I see how it's going to impact that beer. And yeah, huge difference. That is not a number to overlook if you really want to dial on a recipe.
So with syrup, uh, is that more predictable? I would assume that would be more predictable since it's a more produced product with ingredients added and such.
Yeah, and I'll mention I was raised with syrup and then I became syrup, so it doesn't feel right to me either. Um, but that's the way it's spelled, so I'm gonna go with it. Yeah, so you would get a consistency, and especially with the syrups that use extract instead of a puree that was reduced into a syrup, um, because it's so, they use X amount of sugar, X amount of liquid, X amount of extract. You're going to get the same product every time. And uh, syrups are fun to play with in beers. I've done it even up at TwinSpan, and I did it a few times as a home brewer. You want to look at. I would stay away from like shaved ice syrups, like the
Uh,
kind of dessert contributions, and go to a coffee shop. Look at what the coffee shops are using. Look at what Italian soda places are using. Um, those can be a lot of fun with beer, and they're already adding. In those cases, they're adding the syrup to a finished product like coffee or a specific type of, Coca-Cola or some type of soda. So they're designed to play well with beverages. So um, last year for Halloween at TwinSpan, I did a Halloween candy mix, a little short run of beers that had candy flavors, and our most popular one was my pre-prohibition lager, which I believe I sent you, James, on the last show.
hmm
And then I added um, caramel syrup, which I
Ooh.
know isn't fruit, and green apple extract. And I was going for those, those suckers, those lollipops that had the green apple with the caramel coating.
Huh.
And it did taste like that. And yeah, really, really popular. I'll have to bring it back.
I may or may not have used Hungry Jack pancake syrup in a beer that's going to be on the show. That's,
I've used maple syrup as well,
well, this is not as pure. Well, we've used maple syrup. I mean, like grade B maple syrup, real stuff, and it turned out really well. But this is like microwavable Hungry Jack pancake syrup. So,
and you know what? That's the best stuff to use for getting maple syrup flavor in a beer. They
really,
yeah, they this is going to become the syrup show instead of the fruit show. But the reason for that is they'll do like a corn syrup with fenugreek. So it is not coming from a tree, and if it is, very little of it comes from a tree. In some of those cases, I don't want to call out any specific vendor because I don't know, but I did make a maple syrup beer late last year, and I looked into it, and I could either go broke buying the finest juice from trees, or I could get, Gus's discount syrup that comes in the 5-gallon drums, and the flavor is so much more of what we think of as maple syrup from. It's less natural, yeah, but they're manufacturing that flavor, so you're going to get that intensity of flavor per ounce from the fake stuff.
You may not want to get the ones that had butter flavoring added, but
no.
So what about extract? Is all extract bad?
No, absolutely not. Most, yeah. So as a home brewer, I absolutely snub my nose at anyone who ever used extract, and I did it from a position of experience because I had tried many extracts. There are certain extracts that even the good ones still taste kind of fake. Raspberry for me. Raspberry extract, for some reason, it always comes off as kind of tinny. It almost makes me think of like blood flavor, which is just awful. And so my palate, for whatever reason, I can pretty much pick out when raspberry extract has been used. Whereas real raspberries or raspberry puree can be beautiful in beer. I have never found a good extract sold at a homebrew shop. I don't. Whatever reason, the people who make flavoring additions for homebrewers, they're not talking to the same people who are making extracts for soda and coffee and bakers. Maybe don't look at the homebrewing space if you're going extract shopping. Maybe look at, like I said, coffee. Look at candy makers. Look at bakers, because bakers have been sneaking in different flavors for a while now, and they've got it down to a science. I actually.
Now you mentioned Amaretti, right? Is that a good one?
I love their extracts, and I was just talking to a few other brewers recently, and it's like revealing your secret fishing hole. But they told me, they're like, when we use extract, it's Amaretti. So
well, Steve I don't know if he does it now, but he at one point sold Amaretti extracts at stevesbrewshop.com. And I bet you High Gravity would have some too.
Yeah, and there could be other good ones. I've had good luck with some from a candy maker. I don't recall the name offhand, but I got them through Amazon. They were a little more. They tasted a little less natural, but it was, if you use it in the right place, like if you're making a Sour Patch Kids beer or something. Why not lean into that artificial flavor? But there are good extract manufacturers, and I wouldn't rely solely on extract though. I still think just extract can come off a little one note, or you're just not getting the best experience.
And a lot of it has to do with how much you add, because if you add the whole 4-ounce bottle to a 5-gallon batch of beer without tasting it, you might have made a mistake.
Yeah, I did the math on that. Extract, and I've done the personal experience as well. Typically a good extract, 3 milliliters per 5 gallons. That's it.
Oh,
that's like, you get the little children's medicine dropper. Hopefully you've cleaned out the aspirin or Advil or whatever was in it, and then use that. And that's a really nice way to dose. And with all these things, with all these fruit additions and extract, remember that you can always add more. You can't take away.
Oh yeah.
So start small and keep building it up.
So when you're picking fruit, so to speak, for your beers, what are the factors that you've got to think of? Because not every fruit is the same as far as flavor characteristics. I mean, some are more subtle than others, and some lend different characteristics that may or may not go with the beer that you're trying to bump up.
Yeah, exactly. But if we can take a step back, we skipped over one really important fruit, I think, and a fruit format, and that's concentrate.
Oh, okay.
And concentrate's more processed than syrup or puree, less than extract, and it absolutely is important. It's important in cloning some very fruit-forward recipes that you're familiar with, James. Um, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Um, yeah, extract, and again, extract like I think you can do a beer with just puree. I think you can do a beer with just fresh and whole, and even syrup maybe. You should not and cannot do a beer with just extract and just concentrate. It's just going to come off kind of flabby and dull in one note, and it's because of that processing. So you want to kind of combine. You want to combine some. If you really want to make a good complex fruit beer, pick from multiple categories.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so back to it. Why what considerations should you have if you're picking and blending? Is there's a few things. Look at intensity, and I feel like a lot of people start and stop there. Like we know raspberries can be pretty intense, pound per pound, whereas watermelon, strawberries, yeah, peach, mango even can be a little less intense. Whereas I think watermelon's probably the bottom there in terms of ounce per ounce. So you want to look at intensity, and that'll lead into how much you want to use. You want to look at acidity. So acidity is huge. If you're doing a lot of fruit beers, get a pH meter or get some good pH strips. Acidity can affect mouthfeel. It can affect the finish, the flavor of the beer. It can affect the color of a beer. And if you're using something too acidic, you can quickly, in the wrong beer, you can quickly drive it into being this thin, kind of harsh mess. And if you are using a lot of a fruit that isn't high in acidity, you might want to bump it up with some other form of acid, lactic acid or phosphoric, or even I've done lemon juice. A little less scientific there, but that can really totally change a beer, make it much brighter in color and flavor and finish. So acidity is something to pay attention to, and there's charts out there online on acidity levels, and most of it should be intuitive if you've eaten the fruit. Again, watermelon's not very acidic, but cranberries and grapefruit are quite acidic. Lemon, lime, very acidic.
And what is after, we've got to talk about pre-fermentation and post-fermentation. I mean, that's another decision, not only just on what fruit to pick, but how to treat it. I mean, if somebody asked me on one of the comments on one of the videos that I posted where I just, put the unfermented fruit puree in the keg. They said, well, what if I'm a home brewer? What if I add the puree to the fermenter instead of the keg? And that will change the fruit a bunch. I mean, that's one consideration that you've got to consider as well.
Yeah, and that's when to add it. So if you add it in the mash, I don't know why you would add it to the mash. You just like throwing money away. You'll probably get you'll get a color contribution, maybe. You'll get different sugars. You might start setting in a haze already because the pectins are going to leach through. Add it in the boil. Again, you're not going to worry about infecting your beer, but you're not going to get much flavor. And I think a lot of, and I'm personally guilty of this. When you first start out brewing and you're so terrified of infecting the beer, you're throwing everything in the boil, and you throw it in, and there's a brief moment where it just smells incredible. And what you don't realize then is if you can smell it, you're never going to smell it again. That aroma, that flavor has volatilized off. It's gone. So that's true with fruit. That's true with hops. If you walk into a brew house and you smell this huge hop aroma, fruit aroma, that smells great, but it's not in the beer anymore. It's gone.
Right.
So I think the closer you can get the serving, the better. If you want to maintain that bright, natural fruit flavor, um, adding it ahead of fermentation as well is going to throw off your acidity, and it's going to affect fermentation, and it could be in some not so great ways,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's highly acidic. In that case, you'd want to, I guess if you've already done it, I don't know how you fix that, how you would raise acidity in a way that wouldn't negatively impact the rest of the beer. So I would say do your homework before you just go throwing fruit in, or you can do it after fermentation's done, and then you just have to concern yourself with shelf stability and goopiness in your dip tube.
Nobody likes a goopy dip
No,
tube.
no. I think there's
See your doctor.
there's medicine for that. Yeah.
There's yet another delicious offering available from our friends and sponsors, Ricky and Kelly at Groenfell and Havoc Meaderies up in Vermont. Ricky says Rose Brew is back and available this week. Rose Brew is a tasty craft mead made from honey, of course, rose hips, and rose water, and at 6.5% ABV. Like many of the Groenfell and Havoc honey-based beverages, it's very sessionable, perfect for summertime quaffing. Theodora M. on Untapped says Rose Brew is rosy sweet, just a tad tart, delicious craft mead. And John P. on Untapped says Rose Brew has a tasty and fruity bouquet. Delicious. Groenfell delivers to most states across the country. If you order from groenfell.com, you can find a wide selection of delicious craft honey-based beverages and find fun mead-related accessories like maybe a wooden or a horn cup, tankard thing that you definitely need if you're a mead lover. Check them out at family-owned and operated groenfell.com. That's GROENNFELL. But there's something that happens, you have unfermented, and acidity was what triggered me to talk about the fermentation process. But there is something, the juice does change in flavor, once that those sugars get fermented, that sweetness goes away, and, that some of the balance of that juice gets unbalanced, and some of the positive characteristics that, or the characteristics that might have been positive, in the unfermented fruit come out unbalanced, you would think, like maybe too much bitterness or too much acidity, or, there's just the act of fermentation is going to change the character of your fruit, and it's got to, kind of enter into your equation.
Yeah, I mean, fermentation is another step in processing fruit. It's another way to process fruit. So you're going to have a different product at the end than you started with. I mean, what is apple cider other than, shelf-stable apple juice? You can't keep your apples around forever, so you need to ferment. You ferment that out, and you can keep it for months or years. So yeah. It's a processing step. It's going to change things.
Which leads us into sugar and fermentability. I mean, if you're adding fruit with sugar in it to your beer, that's going to change not only the flavor characteristics, but the alcohol content and all kinds of things.
Yeah, you wouldn't think after you finished a beer you would pour table sugar into a beer. So you should consider this fructose, and the fruit sugar is going to it's probably in a pre-fermentation, it's going to affect the yeast. They're going to want to break down those simpler sugars first. You're going to get a different finishing gravity. You're going to get a different product. And then after fermentation's over, if there's still yeast hanging around, they'll find that fruit sugar, and they'll go to town again. So yeah, sugar contribution. And this to me was not super intuitive, but there's charts online again. Stuff like grapes and mangoes are really high in sugar. Stuff like cranberries, raspberries are quite low. Pineapples, I would have thought would be low. They're so acidic, and I figured there's just, I don't know. I'm not, like I said, not a scientist, but it's right in the middle. It's like, it contributes a little bit of sugar, not a lot of sugar.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's going to affect, and that sugar, what doesn't get fermented, it's going to affect your finishing mouthfeel. And what does get fermented is, it's going to thin out your beer.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Do you combat if you're making a beer that's going to have sugar additions? You've got to start thinking at the mash tun, right? As far as the balance of your grains and the building in some unfermentable sugars maybe at the beginning, so that they kind of balance out the addition of those very fermentable sugars with the fruit.
yeah, so I do that in a few beers where uh, I actually go the other way, where I know this beer is going to finish super dry, but I want a little more body. So I will ferment it out dry and knock as much yeast as I can, because I know there's this fruit sugar load coming that will raise those finishing gravity points and contribute to mouthfeel. It's I think that's part of why my fruited kettle sours have been as well received as they have, is because I'm paying attention to that balance between tart, dry, and fruit puree.
Hmm.
And fruit puree absolutely contributes mouthfeel after a certain point. You can feel it just kind of get into the beer and just kind of lay down, and it just adds this coating, this body, this extra little oomph in there.
Yeah, and if you're making a tart fruited beer, that's another, if you're saying, if you're having a tart beer without the fruit, and then you're adding a tart fruit on a
Yeah, that can get
top.
pretty intense. Yeah.
So which may have something to do with the your decision of which fruit to use.
Yeah, so I have a fruited sour series at Twinspan, and so far the two releases have been named after Full House characters. There's Barry, Kate, and Ashley, and it was a berry blend of different berry purees, and the newest one is Uncle Juicy, and which one of my servers gave me that name, and I thought that sounds disgusting. And then I laughed, and I came back to him the next day, and I go, you know what? I think I'm going to use that. And yeah, so that is mango, pineapple, and orange. So
Ooh.
the pHs on Berry Kate, actually, before I added the fruit, was quite a bit lower than the pH of Uncle Juicy. But these berries are lower in acidity, and sugar content's a little higher, versus Uncle Juicy, where I use these. Orange is quite acidic, and
Pineapple.
and pineapple, yeah. And I used whole pineapple actually in that one. They've all finished basically the same tartness and the same perceived body because of that. So I leaned in. I had that decision of what fruits do I use with this higher pH, and I said, yeah, pineapple's quite acidic, so I'm gonna double down on that.
Huh. And I guess the last question to ask is how much, and that's a big question, depending on the type of fruit, depending on the type of beer, depending on when you're going to add it. Those are all factors that enter into how much to add.
Yeah, again, you can always add more. You can't take away. So start low and move up. So and it's different for each fruit as well. I want to say the old way of thinking was 1 pound per gallon for the more intense fruits, up to 3 pounds per gallon of the really mild fruits. I don't know where I heard that or if there's any science behind it. I think that's actually a little high. And there has been people doing scientific studies and panel studies on this. Really, the more intense fruits, you can get away with half a pound per gallon. My fruited sours are actually a third of a pound of puree per gallon. and it's significant. It's not heavy. I don't think anyone is going to say it's a fruit beer. They're saying it's a fruited sour beer.
Hmm.
I mean, I think there's a distinction there. Belgian Red is a fruit beer, but a beer with cherries added in lightly added in the background, no one's going to say that's a fruit beer. It's that level of intensity. Um, so yeah,
and are all these
3
added in the serving vessel?
After fermentation, I guess I would say would be um, these weights and guidelines would be after fermentation.
Hmm.
Before fermentation, I don't know. I wouldn't want to play that game, at least.
But you're not fermenting the fruit essentially. You're stabilizing it with either temperature or some other method that people could use, and so that's fruit character is going to stay intact in the beer and not be fermented out.
Right. Yep.
But 3 pounds to did you say 3 pounds to 1 gallon?
Yep.
Talk about a slurry.
that would be an expensive, right? And that would be an expensive beer for anyone to make. It comes up with blueberries. I tried to do. I say try. People did like it. It was a blueberry cheesecake beer last year. I just kept adding blueberries on. I'm like, come on, let's get let's show up, guys. And you see the price, the cost of goods sold, it keeps going up, and you're like, at some point I gotta stop. But yeah, that's a lot. And like I said, most of mine are less than a pound per gallon. But that's where blending fruit sources comes in handy. I have my cherry pie line I have on right now. It's my cherry pie flavored beer. I went into it knowing that I was going to do a combination of concentrate and real cherries, frozen real cherries, and just cross my fingers and hope they didn't infect anything. And then to the finished beer. And I did all my math. I'd done this exact same recipe on a homebrew scale, and I scaled everything up accordingly, and the cherries just were not there. And I still don't know quite what that was. Probably seasonal variability. I mean, cherries, these were real cherries, both in concentrated form and the whole cherries. So I'm at concentrate and whole at this point. I had a buddy in town who's a brewer who had extra cherry puree, and he's like, well, I'll sell you some. And so I bought some puree from him. I added it, and I still wasn't getting that cherry flavor that I wanted, that I was expecting. And so then I went to extract, and instead of, and I do this often actually, if I've added the amount of puree I thought was good for a beer and it just wasn't quite there, I will get a good extract and I'll dose it just to kind of nudge it up into being a little more, a little more pineapple-y or a little more peach flavored. And no one calls you out on using extract in that case, because you're using that real fruit. It's just kind of giving it an extra edge. So this cherry beer, concentrate, whole, puree, and then I went to extract, and I was looking for a good cherry extract. Couldn't really find one I was super confident in, so I went with imitation almond extract, because they use it in cherry pies. That is where they get a lot of the cherry pie flavor. And I went with imitation because if you use real almond extract, you got to tell people that have nut allergies maybe they should watch out. And that was it. That did it. And seeing people drink this beer, they're like, yeah, this is good. This is interesting. What is, loads of cherries going on? And I'm like, well, yeah, there's like 4 or 5 different kinds of cherries in there.
Ancient twin span secret, huh?
Right. Embrace. Don't be afraid to mix these things together. I don't know why I'm of the mindset that like it's only pure fruit beer if you use one type of fruit or whole. It's no chef is going to say you have to use this exact ingredient. You blend to match the flavor,
and whatever works and whatever the customers like.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, see, Adam, you knew a lot about fruit.
Yeah, I try.
Or at least you could fake it.
I was blown away that I've made that many fruit beers. I'm like, really? I did not set out to do that. I did not expect. Maybe that's my thing. I don't know.
You
Half my
accidentally
beers.
you accidentally became the fruit guy.
Yeah, and like I mentioned at the top of the show, I've got a couple in the works right now, and some of them are, I mean, they're all interesting, but the current challenge was a salted lime lager.
Ooh.
And lime adds acidity. Salt knocks the acidity back up. It counters it. And so I've been playing this game of trying to get the levels just right. And yeah, fruit's fun. It adds some interesting flavors that you don't normally get out of your normal brewing toolkit, and it keeps you on your toes for sure.
Well, there you go. All right, Adam, this has been a lot of fun again. And now our challenge is what to talk about next time and when.
Right. Yeah, I'll get thinking about it.
Maybe I'll make a field trip at some point in the future.
Please do. And anyone listening, if you ever stop by, I'm there on the weekends typically. Go up to the window and tap. Like, don't bang on it because you'll probably scare me back there brewing. But yeah, I'll come out and we'll talk beer. We'll talk fruit beer.
So tell them where you are again.
I am at Twin Span Brewing in Bettendorf, Iowa. Right, you can see us from Interstate 80. So if you got any road trips across the country, make a pit stop. We'll hook you up.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, James.
Well, thanks again to Adam. So much to learn about fruit, and yet another tool to put into your brewing toolkit to brew tasty things. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. Talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.